I am Gunilla Björklund, and on this first slide you can see my email address as well. And that could be useful if you want to ask something linked to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to have the first lecture on water, and Bo Liebert is going to have the second lecture on water, and in between there we have half an hour when you can look at the questions that could be useful for you to respond to, because the questions you have a possibility to discuss in the first 10 minutes after this lecture. And then for 20 minutes, we have a possibility listening to what you have got out of those questions. This first slide describes something that is linked to water, very much so. And that is also the main problems when it comes to water. And I'm talking about water from a global perspective right now. The figures are not quite certain figures right now, but because it has happened a bit since those figures were published. But the figures as such describes the problems when it comes to water. And it's more than 1.5 billion people lacking safe access to water. That is one of the real issues that has been discussed in the issue about human right to water, because all people will need water. Linked to the access to water is also the possibility to have access to safe sanitation. And they are often linked to each other, just because of you need to have access to safe sanitation as well, because otherwise you have a clear linkage not to have a safe access to water either. And it's more than 5 million people dying each year due to problems when it comes to water. Water pollution is increasing. And then floods and droughts are increasingly part due to climate change. Floods and droughts are the two different parts of access to water. Flood is, of course, too much water, and drought is too little water. And when it comes to the issue of drought, UN has a convention that's been negotiated within the UN framework. And that convention is the Convention to Combat Desertification in those countries having too little water. And that convention has, for the last 2 years, been negotiating text for that will be negotiated more formally within the framework of the Convention to Combat Desertification. And that will be a meeting in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire, a little more than a month from now. I have been involved in that for a couple of years, and I'm going to be there at that meeting as well, as I'm the chair of that group. Water pollution is increasing. We are using different kind of substances that are polluting the water access. And that means that we need to deal with the issue of water pollution quite a lot. When the issue of water in a UN perspective started to be discussed at meetings, that was 50 years before this year. That was the first UN meeting, not on water only, but on...
You have to turn off your microphone, Björn.
Oh, so that was it. Okay. Well, the UN meeting on human and environment and human being, that was 50 years before now. And water issues were one of the issues that were discussed at that meeting. And that as a result of that, a couple of years later, there was a big UN meeting on water in Mar del Plata in Argentina. And that was one of the most important starting meeting when it comes to water issues. Well, the last item on this slide is that water-related conflicts are increasing, and that you will hear more about from Mr. Bo Lieber. Yes, well, how much water is needed? We don't have to dig into this in detail, but you can just pick something and then realize that to produce a lot of stuff that we think we do need, we also use a lot of water for the production. A can of fruit, 35 liters of water, and that's just a small can of fruit. So it's a production that where you need to use a lot of water as well. 150 cubic meters of water to produce a new car. I don't know from which year this figure was. It has happened a lot of changes since then, but still it's a an important figure that needs to be thought of. Well, then I'm going from where we need to use water and to what kind of water is available. And this figure, it describes the different types of water that is available. It's still from a global perspective. And what you can see here, oh yeah, that I don't have. you can see the salt water on the globe. We have the 97% of the water is salt water. It's not just water in the oceans, but some of the groundwater too is salt water. But the main fresh water we do have is not the one that we have in the lakes and the rivers. That's just 0.3%. But it's what we have in the, or have had, in the glaciers and the permanent snow cover. That's 69%. And then we have the groundwater, the soil moisture, the swamp water, and the permafrost. And that's part of the water that is fresh water as well. But as I said, we have groundwater that is salty as well. And you have access to that kind of groundwater in parts of the Aral Sea. No, there. This map, I have some global maps to show right now. And this one is showing in the bluish greenish color, the dark one, that is where we do have the main precipitation. The main rain is concentrated along the equator, the areas of the main rain. But you can see, of course, that it's not, it is not like the same amount on all sides along the equator, but you have a concentration of the precipitation on the western part of the land area along the equator. And the reason for that is, of course, that the Earth is circulating. So that's where the precipitation is getting to the Earth's surface. And then we also have the, we also have the mountainous areas, which means that a lot of the precipitation is falling outside as a consequence of that the air is transported up through the mountains. So at the so-called backside of the mountains, you have rather dry areas. The deserts, the big desert area, are along the Andes, at the western side of Latin America. We also have desert areas at the western side of Africa. We have the big desert area, Sahara. And then we have the area at the Aral Sea, a part of that. This is not a very detailed map when it comes to exactly where you do have the desert area. You also have areas with rather little water up here, which is rather much from the equator. The equator is down here. And that means that you have rather little water on these parts as well. This map is also a map showing fresh water availability. There is something when you look at this map which makes it a bit strange. One reason that it looks a bit strange, you can see at the close to Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is very dry here, but when you come to Kazakhstan, it looks like being much wetter. And we also have this kind of strange history here, where you have the Mali and Burkina Faso, which seem to be rather wet, close to the middle of the Sahara Desert. The reason for these strange figures is that this map built on reporting from the different countries. So it's and then the reported data for the different countries looks like representing the whole country as such. And of course, you don't have this much water in the whole of the country, but you have areas here that are rather wet, but not the one close to the Mauritania. Mauritania is on this map. It's rather dry, but it looks very strange with this figure as such. Let's see if I can.
Gunilla, may I interrupt you from the other figure?
Yes.
Did you notice that it is not only the availability of water in absolute terms, but per capita? So it also is influenced by the population density in different areas.
You'll get that. You'll get that. Because on the map that I show, it's not by the amount of people living there, but you will get that later on. This map is a map showing it's a climatic map. What we have seen so far has been meteorological and hydrological maps. This is a climate map. And that's the reason for this rather strange color. Because this, which is close to or around the equator, is of course a wet area. This is also a wet area. And here we have the very narrow, rather dry area. And then up here it's a dry area. This is a climatic system where you can see the temperature and what the temperature is resulting in when looking into areas close to the equator, for instance. Because the dry and the very hot area up here. Oh, there. means that you have a high evapotranspiration. And down here, where you have the rainforest, you of course do have some evapotranspiration as well. But the rainforest as such is protecting the water, so that you just because of that get the drier area. So it's both, it's the access to water as such, and it is what the temperature is, what is happening to the wet areas where we have a high temperature, because the higher the temperature is, the higher the evapotranspiration is. Well, that one I think we can skip. Now, Björn, we come to your population. Because this map is describing the area where you have the most dense population. On this map, we don't see any access to water, but we do see where you have the competition for water are the highest one. These I don't have any date for this one, but it's certainly not the last 20 years. It's before that, but you can see where you do have competition that are really high. But as I said today, it's up there. Then we come to the issue of water scarcity. Water scarcity and water stress. Water scarcity, that means that it's rather little access to water. But water scarcity as such, it depends on different types of processes. Some areas, when you look at what we have been doing right now, we have been discussing the access to water by precipitation, but then we have the unaccess to water by evapotranspiration. Then we have a certain amount of water that is left, and that water, we have different groups of people that are competing over that water. And if there are many people competing over a small amount of water, that will mean that there is a certain water stress, or it could be even more. It could be what we call water scarcity. And the colors on this map describes different types of water scarcity. And the red color, that's mainly the physical water scarcity. Physical water scarcity, that is precipitation minus evapotranspiration. And if it's striped, then we also have other types of competition for the water, and that would mean that we can have a red striped area where partly where you do have other kind of competition for the water as well. The below color says that this is areas where we have little or no water scarcity. And then even if you're rather silent, I could hear your voice saying something about that Uzbekistan on this map is blue striped, and blue is little or no water scarcity. And the reason for that is, of course, that the main part of the water in Uzbekistan is coming from the mountainous areas. And that means that the balance in between much water in the mountainous areas and a small amount of water in the downstream areas gives this rather strange blue color. We also have another type of water scarcity, and that's the yellow one. And the yellow one, that is economic water scarcity. And economic water scarcity, that is areas where the economy is hindering the countries from using the amount of water that would be necessary. This is a figure for water use. And what we are using is of course the available amount of water. And this is rather schematic data that you can see on this. It's the water we have access to. That I need to come to an end rather so. Water, the use that we need the water for is the main type of water use is water for agriculture. And water for agriculture, that is the green dotted line. Water for industrial use is the red one. And you can see that it's, this says it should be a forecast, but that is about where we are in this schematic types of description. This is about how it looks like. The municipal use, the bluish data that we can see here, that is water for drinking water supply and sanitation. The yellow one, it's for reservoirs, and that has changed quite a lot right now, even though we have a rather big reservoir in the Millennium reservoir in Ethiopia, for instance. But these are a bit changed, of course, due to how it's used right now. Skip that. Skip that. then I think I use this as the final one, because this is what is called the Dublin Principles. That is principles for use of water that was negotiated in the process leading up to the Rio conference. Dublin was a preparatory meeting in water for the Rio conference. And these principles were negotiated in Dublin and brought to Rio and further negotiated there. These are still principles that are used and that are discussed. You can see the four principles, that fresh water is a finite and vulnerable resource, essential to sustain life, development, and the environment. Water development and management should be based on a participatory approach involving users, planners, and policy makers at all levels. This is something that is rather new, was rather new in Dublin, because participatory approach, all the ones who has or who need to be integrated in how the water is used, they need to be included when using and presenting the water use. Principle number 3 is also an important principle. Women play a central part in the provision, management, and safeguarding of water. And that was still after Dublin, an issue that was a bit contentious, believe me or not. The 4th principle, water has an economic value in all its competing uses and should be recognized as an economic good as well as a social good. And these are the principles that still is regarded as being important principles. Of course, we have other types of principles nowadays, but they are getting out of the Dublin Principles as such. I have several slides that I wasn't able to get into because my time has passed, as you can see, or as you could hear. But as I put this presentation on, I guess you can see the slides that I'm not able to discuss right now. And because of that, I say that this will need to be it for right now. I have 2 questions that you should prepare and be able to discuss before in the next half an hour. Question number 1, which are the most important difficulties when it comes to access to water? And question number 2. Where and for which purposes is water used in different parts of the world? You can see a lot of this from the slides and hopefully from my presentation. So now it's time for your close to 10 minutes to discuss this. Prepare your responses to the questions, and then we have a discussion for 20 minutes. Going to, yeah.
Just a moment. And I will speak about a very specific aspect of water management, and that is managing transboundary waters. That is the kind of rivers, especially that flow from one.
Bo, can you get your picture a little bigger?
Well, I think it's your computer, Lars, that I have it.
No, it's
same here.
Mine as well.
Okay.
It's very small in mine as well.
You can enlarge your picture or put it into presentation mode.
I had it in presentation mode.
Okay.
Now it's presentation mode.
Oh, that's good. Now we see it bigger. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, that's my presentation anyway about the transboundary waters, and I will focus on 2 things actually: the principles for cooperation between different countries, and I will also look a little bit into the details for Central Asia. As you can understand, most rivers worldwide, they cross borders, and in many cases in Europe, you have a cooperation, a joint management through agreements and joint institutions. The classic example is the Danube River, where you have 14 countries that have agreed to manage this river together. Generally, countries tend to cooperate over water rather than to have conflicts, although there are conflicts and increasing water stress that might increase the tendency of conflict. The sad thing is that the majority of transboundary basins outside of Europe doesn't have basin agreements or existing agreements because the cooperation is not good enough simply. So there is a need for a global, legal and intergovernmental framework for transboundary cooperation, and which is something that is under development right now. I also want to point out that one of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, number 6, is dealing with water, and there is a specific target saying that by 2030, integrated water resources management should be implemented at all levels, including through transboundary cooperation as appropriate. So I want to talk mainly in this part of my presentation about the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes. This is a convention where Uzbekistan is a party. So you are supposed to manage your waters according to this convention. And I want to stress the 3 principles that this convention is built on. First principle is that if you are sharing water or river together with other countries, you have a right to use the water, but you have to use it reasonably and equitably. These are legal terms, obviously, but it says that you have to use them, but you have to take into account the effects on other countries. You have to avoid causing what you call significant transboundary harm. You cannot stop the water. You cannot lead the water to other places because it has a natural flow. And in order to solve this issue, in order to make this happen, you have to cooperate. If you look at Europe, all countries except very few are, and then I include Central Asia, are actually party to this UNECE Water Convention, which I call it. It's actually in Central Asia, I want to point out that Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are not party of the convention. I will not discuss the reasons, but there is a tendency that upstream countries doesn't want to be hindered by what the downstream countries are saying. And this is especially in the case of Central Asia, where the upstream countries are poor and small. They want to avoid having legal obligations. But I will come back to the situation in Central Asia in a bit. There are more specific obligations under this convention. You have the obligation to conclude specific agreements and establish joint bodies. I will get back to the Central Asian situation in a while. You have to react positively to requests for consultations. For example, if one country says that they want to talk about a specific thing regarding the water with another country, both countries have to agree on that. You have to develop joint monitoring and assessment. You have to exchange information. Of course, managing a water course, it's important if you are several countries, it's important to have the same platform of information in order to make a decision. Warning and alarm systems you should set up. I mean, in case there would be a break of a dam, such as the Sardobe Dam a couple of years ago in Uzbekistan, there should be systems in place that warns the downstream countries or regions about that. And then finally, an item, mutual assistance. You should help each other if there is a problem. But just want to mention that there are actually two transboundary water conventions that preaches basically the same things. I have spoken about the UNECE Water Convention, which is more specific. It tells the countries that you have to set up agreements, that you have to have joint bodies. The UN Water Conventions gives more general advice or general sort of legal directions, which is in the same way, basically. It has the same things, but a little bit more unspecifically as the UNECE Water Convention. Let's have a look then at Central Asia. You have the two main rivers, Sirdarya and Amudarya. We'll talk more, by the way, about the Aral Sea next week. So I won't go into detail there, but what I should say perhaps, and that you all know, especially those of you who live in Nukos, is that there's a lot of water flowing down these two rivers, but there is very little water that comes down to the mouth of the rivers. And in fact, there is pretty much no Aral Sea left anymore. I should say, however, that there is this northern Aral Sea, which is a rather stable situation on the Kazakh side. And I know also that there are much work done on the Uzbek side with regard to the delta land of the Amudarya. But what you can see here is that the red arrows, they show where you tap the water from the rivers to big irrigation fields.
We don't see any red arrows. We just see your first slide all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. What about now?
Now?
Now it's a second or third or whatever. Yeah.
It's slide 7, in fact.
Yeah. Do you see the map now?
Yeah.
So you see the map?
Yes. Yes.
And you see the red arrows?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Lars, do you see them as well?
Yes, yes. Yes,
okay.
Of course,
fine.
Everyone does.
Okay, well, I cannot say. I thought everyone was seeing. What I want to say here is that the big conflict or the big tension in Central Asia, as you may know, is that the upstream countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they are very dependent on hydropower. And you have major dams like the Taktagul Dam in Kyrgyzstan, and you have Nurek Dam in Tajikistan. And they want to use the hydropower mainly in the winter time, which means that they are releasing the water in the winter time in order to have generation of electricity, while the downstream countries, especially Uzbekistan, that uses much of the water for irrigation, they want the water in the summertime. So that's a really difficult tension and difficult situation. Nowadays, the situation is better because there has been now some last couple of years agreements that the downstream countries delivers electricity in the winter time to Tajikistan, especially Kyrgyzstan, and while the upstream countries tend to deliver the water to the downstream countries in the summertime during the vegetation period. But again, almost no water ends up in the Aral Sea. So basically, what was the ecosystem of the Aral Seas does not exist anymore. There is a few joint bodies, joint organizations in Central Asia that includes the former Soviet Union republics, but not Afghanistan. I want to stress that Afghanistan is part of the Aral Sea Basin, the Amudarya River. The three organizations that I want to mention here is the International Fund for the Saving of the Aral Sea, which is IFAS, that has a broader responsibility, basically, and where the chairmanship of this organization moves between the presidents of the countries. And under IFAS, you have two organizations. You have the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination and the Interstate Commission for Sustainable Development. These are organizations dealing with separate issues. ICWC deals basically with the sharing of water for irrigation, not so much else. ICSD deals in a very superficial way with sustainable development, but not a lot with water-related ecosystems. What has happened in the later years, as many of you may know, is that instead of strengthening the basin-wide organization to have a basin-wide management of the water, you have a lot of development of bilateral cooperation between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, between Uzbekistan and between Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. The problem has been and is that the link...
Close your microphone.
Some of you have to turn off your microphones and not talking but listening instead. Betov, for example, like Utan Betov, turn off your microphone. Miryatdin, turn off your microphone. A little discipline, please.
So
thank you.
The issue here is to make sure that you try to establish a cooperation between different sectors. And I participated in a project some 10 years ago when we tried to look at the water and energy sectors and try to define how these sectors could work together. In principle, there is a good opportunity to work together between the upstream countries having no hydrocarbons and the downstream countries having a lot of hydrocarbons. at least in a temporary situation, these countries could help each other to make sure that you have water when you needed it for irrigation, and to have energy when you needed it in the winter time upstream. Of course, this is only a temporary solution, because as we have been discussing in this sustainable development course, you have to, in the end, stop using, and these are the two main problems here, stop using hydrocarbons, and you have to, in the end, make sure that you have a better protection of the water-related ecosystems. In this project, we developed a different proposal for a different joint organization in the region, where you had a water and energy council on the one hand, and you have an environmental council on the other hand, in order to clarify the opportunities and boundaries for water, energy, and environment, in order to reach a better sustainable situation. The fact is, if you look at the economic situation, the lack of the costs of inaction of water cooperation between the countries in the Aral Sea Basin has been estimated to be more than 4.5 billion US dollars per year. So more information not only gives a better situation with regard to environment, hopefully, but also a better economic situation. In the end of my presentation, I just mentioned a couple of other issues related to cooperation, needed cooperation in the Aral Sea Basin, including for Uzbekistan. Dam safety is something I've already mentioned, and we had a recent accident actually in Uzbekistan that flowed over to Kazakhstan. There is a need for a better cooperation on dam safety. This is the Kirov Dam in Kyrgyzstan. If that dam would break, there would be hundreds of thousands of casualties probably in the city of Taraz, which is slightly below this dam. You have to make sure that these infrastructures are well built and will not suffer any accident. A rather good cooperation example is in Central Asia is between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, where much of the infrastructure for water use is on the Kyrgyz side, but the Kazakh will also use that infrastructure. So there is a sort of a joint management of the infrastructure, dams, canals, etc., between these two countries. There has also been developing cooperation on the Pyanch River, which is a small river, not a small river, but a river leading up to the Amudarya River. It's shared by Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and there were developments of cooperation on this river between the two countries. But unfortunately, because of the takeover of Taliban, I think that it seems that the cooperation between Tajikistan and Afghanistan has grown much worse. This is a joint group of Kazakhs, of Tajiks and Afghans checking out some infrastructure on the Tajik side. Something which is very important, but is not at all enough developed in Central Asia, and that is cooperation on water quality. Gunilla mentioned water quality as a very important aspect. And of course, the people of you that live in Nukus, you are very much aware of the problems you have to get good, fresh water. This is a picture from a working group on experts on water quality in Central Asia. From all of the countries, your countries, this was the initiation of some kind of cooperation across the countries in the region. This working group is still working, but the cooperation is not as efficient as it could be. There is now a better development of cooperation between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan on water quality, and there is a hope that this cooperation could serve to give better water quality, especially downstream along the two big rivers. In my slides, you will see that there are a number of study questions. I will not go through the study questions now, but this may be a help for you when you study in advance of your exams. So I will just, we have a few minutes if you want to pose some questions. And this is my mail address. If you want to send a question or contact me, don't hesitate to do that. So I'll finish off my presentation here, but we have a few minutes left. So if there are some questions, I'll be ready to respond to them. Thank you.
Bo, I think you should show your first 6 slides because we never saw them.
It's kind of a mystery for me. It's kind of a mystery for me, but I'll do it, of course. Yeah. This is the second slide. It talks about that many rivers, most rivers actually, are shared by different countries. It says that you should develop agreements to cooperate. It says that water cooperation is something that generally works well. But there are also problems. Then I had a slide showing the name of this Transboundary Water Convention with the 3 legal principles: the right to use the water, but not else than reasonably and equitably, which is a legal term, to avoid causing significant transboundary harm, and the need to cooperate. And here is the map of the parties to this water convention in Europe. And you can see that in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan are parties to the convention, but Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are not. This is number 5. These are the obligations, some of the basic obligations if you are party to this convention. You must conclude agreements, establish joint bodies. You must respond positively to requests for consultation. You should develop joint monitoring and assessment. You should have a possibility for exchange of information. I spoke about the warning and alarm systems, and finally, mutual assistance. And here is the 6th one, showing that there are actually 2 different conventions dealing with transboundary water cooperation. And then I think we ended up.
Then we saw, yes, then we saw the pictures.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can add here, if you allow, Bo, that when I made this, looked into this issue some time back, there were 200 river commissions in the world, international river commissions. And of course, the interesting note is that when there is a major things happening in the upstream and the downstream rivers, the downstream countries suffer from that. The normal reaction is not that there is a conflict or there is a request for compensation or so. The normal reaction has been, God say, increased cooperation. For example, in the River Rhine, there is such an occasion, and there are several others. So that's a good thing. It could actually lead to peaceful development rather than a bad development.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly. And there are, things that the downstream countries can do that makes things better for the upstream countries, for example, in navigation, and when it comes to fish migration as well. So there is a sort of a give and take also in upstream, downstream, and downstream, upstream. Okay, do we have a question? We have one question, if there is Anyone that wants to?
Can I just comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. When you were describing the Rhine River, Lars, what is so important and so good when it comes to the Rhine River is that there are a lot of different conventions linked to the Rhine River, and they came into force, the one after the other, depending on that there were flooding in the middle part of Europe, and then they did get the convention that get into force, and on which you can deal with these kind of issues. And then there was also a link in between the freshwater convention, the Rhine Convention, and the OSPAR and the conventions out in the not the Baltic Sea. It's the
Atlantic.
Well, it's not the full Atlantic, but it's the Scandic and the what's they called?
The North Sea. The North Sea.
The North Sea. That's better. Thank you. Yes. No, but that makes it very interesting. And we also have the Danube, which has it's also developing quite a lot, linked to what is happening in the areas, because the Danube is the river system that has most of bilateral rivers linked to the Danube. So there are, I don't remember how many countries in Europe, but there are very many countries in Europe, and that makes the Danube quite unique as well.
Yeah, I said that in the beginning, but just two words concluding this presentation, and next week we'll speak about the RLC, so I guess we will have a reason to come back to the immediate situation also with regard to ecosystems. And first of all, there's been 2 years of very dry weather in the region, so except for, as I understand, Uzbekistan, there's been a lot of rain this spring. But with regard to the filling up of the rivers and the dams up in the mountains in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, there are, especially for Sirdarya, there are significant problems, and probably it's not unlikely that there will be a dry year this year as well. Whether this is linked to climate change or not, that's another question. Basically, climate change should lead to an increased water flow because of the glaciers up in the mountains that are melting because of so over, I don't know, 30, 40 years, if with the previous precipitation patterns, you would have more water because of this melting of glaciers up in the Hindu Kush and other mountains, the Himalayas basically. But now there has been a few years dry years, and that may also be the result, of course, of a reflection of climate change. So an increased cooperation between the countries, improved irrigation, because it will be difficult to get rid of irrigation because of there's so many people in basically all countries that are fully dependent on irrigated agriculture. But the irrigation water will have to be used much better than it is now, because a lot of the water doesn't end up even in the fields. So thanks for this time. I hope to get some feedback next week also from the region, because I'm very far from Central Asia right now.
Well, then thank you both.